mother-in-law walked into a room with a DNA test already prepared. His strange, The wife to the husband looked disturbed at her instead of his wife after reading it.
Read it. Right now. My mother-in-law dropped a sealed envelope onto my husband's hospital tray table like she owned the room. Nobody spoke, not the nurses, not Marcus, not even me. I was still sore from my emergency C-section, barely able to sit upright while she stood at the foot of my bed holding my newborn like she trusted herself more than his own mother. And honestly, everyone in that room acted like she was in charge. Marcus opened the envelope slowly. His eyes scanned the page once, then again, slower. The color drained out of his face. We were supposed to be leaving the hospital with our baby in less than 20 minutes, but suddenly nobody was moving anymore. Then I noticed something I hadn't been able to stop thinking about since Diane brought my son back from the nursery earlier that morning. The hospital bracelet on his ankle looked different. And when Marcus finally looked up at his mother, he didn't sound shocked. He sounded disgusted. You actually did it? Diane's fingers tightened around the baby blanket almost immediately. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for me to notice. The room stayed painfully quiet. A nurse near the door suddenly became very interested in a clipboard she'd already signed twice. Marcus kept staring at the paper in his hands, while Diane forced out a small laugh that sounded rehearsed. Marcus, she said carefully, we should discuss this privately. Privately. Like I wasn't the one lying in the hospital bed. Like whatever was inside that envelope somehow involved everyone. Except me. I swallowed hard and looked at my husband. What is it? He didn't answer right away. That scared me more than Diane did. Marcus was the kind of man who avoided conflict whenever possible. 8 years together had taught me that. If his mother criticized me, he redirected the conversation. If she crossed a line, he softened it instead of confronting her. Peace first. Always. But now he looked at Diane like he didn't recognize her. Diane finally turned toward me with that same polished expression she'd worn since the day we met. Calm, controlled, superior. You deserve the truth, she said, even if it's unpleasant. My stomach dropped. For months, she'd been planting little comments whenever Marcus left the room. Are you sure about your timeline? Marcus is too trusting. Some families need certainty. At first, I thought it was just her way of reminding me I didn't belong in theirs. Diane came from old money, charity galas, private schools. I grew up moving through foster homes where people locked refrigerators at night. To her, I was temporary, disposable. And now she looked almost satisfied, standing there in my hospital room while I struggled just to sit upright. Marcus finally lowered the paper. It says, I'm not the father, he said quietly. The words hit the room like a power outage. Diane exhaled slowly, like she'd been waiting months to hear them spoken aloud. But Marcus still wasn't looking at me. He was staring directly at her. Then he lifted the paper slightly and asked the one question that made Diane's expression crack for the first time all morning. Where exactly did you get the Dina sample? Answer him, Diane. Marcus said it calmly, but for the first time since I'd known him, his mother didn't interrupt him immediately. She adjusted the sleeve of her blazer instead, buying herself a second. The hospital collected everything necessary after the delivery, she said. I simply requested confirmation. Requested. Like private Dina tests were part of normal discharge paperwork. I watched Marcus stand from the chair beside my bed, still holding the envelope in one hand. His posture had changed completely. Less uncertain, more focused. You requested it from who? He asked. Diane's jaw tightened slightly. Marcus, this doesn't need to become dramatic. I almost laughed at that. Not because anything was funny, but because Diane had spent my entire pregnancy manufacturing tension one comment at a time. She questioned my doctor appointments, asked invasive questions about dates. Once, during dinner, she casually mentioned how often paternity fraud happened now. Always calm, always subtle. And somehow, Marcus had spent months trying to convince me she meant well. Now even he looked unsettled. The nurse by the door shifted awkwardly. Diane noticed it immediately. "You can give us a moment," she told her. The nurse hesitated before leaving the room, and that hesitation bothered me more than the DINA result itself, because suddenly I remembered seeing Diane talking privately with a neonatal nurse 2 days earlier near the nursery entrance. At the time, I assumed she was asking normal grandmother questions. Now I wasn't so sure. Marcus unfolded the paper again. "This says the sample was processed 6 hours ago." Diane crossed her arms. And our son never left this floor except when you took him." For the first time all morning, Diane looked genuinely caught off guard. Then Marcus said something that made the pressure in the room shift instantly. "That test only works," he said slowly, "if that sample actually came from my child." And suddenly, the bracelet on my baby's ankle didn't feel like a small mistake anymore. Marcus held out his hand toward the bassinet. "Give him to Elena." Diane didn't move. Just for a second, but it was enough. The air in the room changed completely. "You're overreacting," she said carefully. "I was trying to protect you." "From my wife?" Marcus asked. Diane ignored him and looked at me instead. "You know why the test came back negative." The accusation landed hard, mostly because I was suddenly doubting everything myself. The changed cap, the loose bracelet, Diane disappearing with the baby for nearly 40 minutes. My hands started shaking. Then I remembered the photo. Earlier that morning, while everyone thought I was sleeping, I'd taken a picture of the bracelet because something felt off. I pulled out my phone and handed it to Marcus. He zoomed in silently, then looked at the bracelet on the baby now. One number was different.
If the bracelet number changed after the baby came back from the nursery, then the DNA result might not be the real problem here.
Marcus went pale, and Diane whispered something that made my stomach drop. "Do not involve hospital security." Hospital security arrived less than 10 minutes later. Diane stopped pretending to be calm after that. She followed Marcus into the hallway, demanding they handle this privately, but he ignored her completely. Meanwhile, a supervisor began checking nursery transfer logs while 2 nurses quietly avoided eye contact with me. That was the moment I knew this wasn't confusion anymore. One of the administrators returned holding a clipboard. "There's a discrepancy with one infant identification record." Diane immediately stepped forward. "This is unnecessary. Nobody listened." Marcus asked for surveillance footage from the maternity wing, and the administrator hesitated before admitting one hallway camera had gone offline earlier that morning. Offline. Right around the time Diane took my baby. Then another nurse entered the room looking nervous. She whispered something to the administrator, whose expression changed instantly. Marcus stood up. "What is it?" The administrator looked directly at us. "The DINA sample submitted by Mrs. Whitmore came from a real infant," he said carefully. "Just not yours." And before anyone could speak again, Diane sat down hard in the chair beside the wall and started crying. The full truth came out over the next 2 hours, piece by piece, and somehow each detail was worse than the last. Diane had arranged everything before I even went into labor. Through one of her charity boards, she knew a neonatal nurse at the hospital, a woman deep in financial trouble. According to hospital investigators, Diane offered her money to help verify the baby's identity before we were discharged. But verification was never the real goal. She wanted proof that I'd betrayed Marcus. When Diane took my son to the nursery that morning, the nurse temporarily switched him with another newborn receiving additional monitoring on the same floor, long enough to alter the identification records tied to the Dina collection. That was why the bracelet number didn't match, why the cap changed, why the nurse at our door looked terrified. The test itself wasn't fake. That was the horrifying part. The Dina result really showed Marcus wasn't the father because the sample came from someone else's baby. When hospital staff finally brought our actual son back into the room, I broke down before I even touched him. I just stared at his face, trying to process how close we'd come to leaving the hospital with another family's child while everyone treated me like I was paranoid. Marcus looked destroyed. Not just angry, ashamed. He turned toward Diane slowly. "You didn't accuse my wife of cheating," he said. "You switched my son to prove it." Diane collapsed to her knees almost immediately. She begged Marcus not to call the police, said she only wanted certainty, claimed she never thought it would spiral this far. But it already had. Hospital security detained the nurse before the end of the day. Diane became part of the criminal investigation alongside her. The hospital launched an internal review, and within a week, several local news stations were covering the story without naming us directly. Marcus cut contact with his mother completely. And a few weeks later, sitting in our apartment with our son finally asleep against my chest, he asked me something quietly. "How did you know so early something was wrong?" I looked down at the little hospital bracelet we'd kept as evidence. Because when you grow up in foster care, I told him, you learn to notice when adults start changing details. And in the end, the only person everyone dismissed in that hospital room was the first person who understood the truth.
The unsettling part isn't that someone switched a newborn baby once. It's realizing how many people can control a situation completely while everyone else still believes nothing unusual is happening.